Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call it when you open up a pot to check on your rice or your pasta and an unexpected blast of hot air fogs up your glasses?
I don't know. What do you call it?
A surprise steam hit! Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I didn't go with the blinding of Isaac or the
That's what I thought you were going with.
reminding of
Yeah.
Isaac or something like that. I know. Instead, I went with the common through line of this week's two games.
Yes, that's true.
A sophisticated second level joke.
Truly.
Anyway, I'm your Viking host, Madelyn.
Then I guess I'm your naked baby host, Emma.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This week, we're going to be talking about The Binding of Isaac and Valheim, both which were surprise Steam hits.
Yeah.
Hence the joke. That's why it was funny, in case
Yes.
you were wondering.
Yeah.
It was a joke
You
about
can
the
laugh
video game sales platform Steam, owned by Valve. So let's talk about The Binding of Isaac. Let's jump right in.
Sure.
So The Binding of Isaac, everything I read about it was like, it's a roguelike shooter, which scared me.
Yes.
I was like, it's a
true.
roguelike shooter? I'm gonna be awful at that. And I was pretty bad at it. The Binding of Isaac is what I played this week, but I was really bracing myself for a bad time with that description. Ignore the shooter part, people. You do shoot projectiles, but it's not a shooter. I mean,
is it more
is.
like a shmup thing?
I don't know what a
bullet
shmup
hell?
is. Maybe a little bit more like that, yeah. There's not that much bullet hell unless you're me and you do not understand projectile motion and you walk into the bullets all the time.
Yeah.
But yes, it's much more, you do not have a gun. You are spitting tears. Not spitting tears. Aggressively blinking tears.
Yes, it'd be weird if you were spitting tears.
Sometimes I do that. You cry and then
that's
it gets in your
saliva.
mouth and then you spit it out.
I think it becomes saliva once it's in your mouth.
This is a question for the philosophers, I think. Anyway, The Binding of Isaac is from Edmund Macmillan of Super Meat Boy. I mean, no longer Super Meat Boy, but at one point of Super Meat Boy. And Florian Himsel?
Himsel.
I never know what to do when there's not an E at the end of SL. Do I need to pronounce it differently?
I don't know.
We'll
We
give
did
Florian
talk
a
about
call.
Super Meat Boy, or just, yeah, we talked about
Yeah, we
Super
did.
Meat Boy on the show. Relatively recently, sometime last year.
Yeah, because I played it and I got it. But I played it and I got it in my old apartment, so it has been at least 6 months or so. But we did talk about Super Meat Boy, so if you want to hear more about Super Meat Boy, go back and download that episode. But this is like the other big game from this half of Team Meat. Came out of a week-long game jam because the other meat guy was on vacation, and Edmund was like, oh, I'll hang out with this other guy that I've made games with before. And they wanted to make a Legend of Zelda style roguelike that was also about how religion is complicated and often bad.
Yes.
So a week feels like enough time for that.
It was, the original release of Binding of Isaac was a Flash game. And because they made it in a week, when they eventually were like, well, we'd like to put this on things that aren't Flash, I'm pretty sure they had to just remake it, because it was made so poorly that they couldn't, like, just port it to another program. They just had to
Yes,
redo
I
it.
will have the caveat of I had about 10 minutes of panic that I was not going to be able to play either game this week, because Valheim, as we'll get to, is not on Mac. even though they are very apologetic about that on their website, but it's not a Mac, so boo me. And The Binding of Isaac, the original, is playable on Mac OS, but if you have upgraded past the 32-bit compatibility, as I have, I tried to hang on to it, and then my computer died this summer, and then I got a computer that was past it when I opened it. So boo, Apple. But you can't play the original on Macs that are past Big Sur, I think. So I had about 10 minutes of panic that I would not be able to play either game, and wouldn't that be disappointing? But fortunately, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth is just a remake and is on all platforms. And as a bonus, I got to play it on the PlayStation instead of my computer.
Yeah.
Even though this is a game that it's very, 4 cardinal direction buttons, that I feel like maybe I could have managed it on the computer without feeling like I was going to die. It was still nice to be able to play it on the PlayStation. So yeah, The Binding of Isaac came out in 2011 in that kind of janky form for Windows, and eventually Mac and Linux. They pretty much, this guy's goal was making Super Meat Boy, and I think we talked about this on the episode, but at the end of making Super Meat Boy was pretty awful experience, right? That they had to jump through tons and tons and tons of kind of publisher type hoops to get the game finished, which sucked. And he didn't want to do that again. But also, Super Meat Boy made so much money that he didn't have to be afraid of a game failing anymore. Mm-hmm. So basically decided to make this game that was like, oh, it will fail. And then it didn't.
The power of the Let's Play rising into prominence.
Seriously. So Binding of Isaac, they released it on Steam, mostly because releasing it on Steam, at least then, I can't imagine it's like quite this easy. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe you probably know more about this than me. They were like, we don't have to get it rated by the ESRB if we put it on Steam. Is that right?
Pretty sure that's true, yeah.
I guess that makes sense, because there's so much just garbage on Steam, which presumably wouldn't be if everything had to get rated.
Yeah.
They just like put it there because they wouldn't have to get it rated, which they were worried about because of the like blasphemous themes, as would come up later in discussions with Nintendo, and also because they could update it, which that's funny. It's a little funny. It just seems so weird to me that like even in 2011 it was like, oh yeah, definitely Steam because I can update it there.
Yeah. I mean, before, when you're, like, putting Flash games out, you're just, like, putting them on, like, a Flash games website. So,
R.I.P.
not
Flash.
much room for upgrading there.
Yeah. And so they put it on Steam, and it was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, it's selling, like, 100 copies a day or so, like, whatever, that's fine. And then, yeah, as Emma just said, suddenly it started to sell more than that, and more than that, and lots more than that, because people were uploading tons and tons and tons of well-watched Let's Plays of the game to YouTube, which drove its sudden, massive, unexpected success.
There was definitely a period, I think, in, like, especially, like, the start of the YouTube boom, I guess. Yeah. Where Let's Plays really did have a pretty significant impact on, like, little indie game successes. I don't know how true that is anymore. But certainly at the time, you could credit a lot of, like, attention being brought to little games like this because, you know, popular YouTubers picked it up. There were less YouTubers back then, so...
Really? I think that's still true. I mean, I've heard that that's still true if, like, Ninja plays a game or something like that, right? That someone on that level of fame playing really makes an impact. But I think that you're right that a lot of that mantle has sort of been taken up by streams as opposed to Let's Plays. I don't know. I'm not that plugged into gaming YouTube. So anyway, I should probably tell you what the game is. Yeah. That would be helpful. So The Binding of Isaac, you play as Isaac, who's a little kid, and it's inspired by the Genesis Bible story of Abraham and Isaac. I think of this as a story that everyone, like, you know the Abraham and Isaac story, right?
Like vaguely.
See, I think of this as just a cultural, like, there are certain Bible stories that everyone knows. And I can never tell how much of that is like, no, like, you just learned more of it than like the average person does, or what it is.
I mean, I definitely think that if you know, we went to church semi-regularly in childhood. We went to Sunday school, at least for a few years. And I do think that skews our perspective as to how much, like, Christianity stories that people who did not go to church actually know. Because I think it is less than, like, our cultural framework would have us assume. Especially since we live in the USA.
I guess that's true, but Abraham and Isaac, you know, it's like Abraham and Isaac are a story that are a Torah story, too. Abraham is, I won't pretend to know nearly as much about Islam, but Abraham is a significant figure for all of the Judeo-Christian type religions. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Abraham and Isaac existed somewhere in that canon as well. But anyway, the quick Bible primer. Here we go. So Abraham, you know, one of God's guys. He's got a son, Isaac, and Abraham very faithful to God. And God says, Abraham, you love me, right? And Abraham says, yeah. And he says, okay, great. So take Isaac to the mountain and sacrifice him to me. And Abraham is going to do that, and then God sends a sheep, and they sacrifice the sheep instead. Maybe it's a goat, some kind of farm animal, and they sacrifice that instead. And so the story takes that, and instead it's Isaac's mom, who, this is not very fleshed out or in the original game, but there are expansions that have been released that have kind of built out Isaac's backstory a little more. But basically, his mom is living alone after Isaac's father has left, which again, you would not pick up, like, didn't pick that up from my game. It was just like, Isaac's mom watches a lot of Fox News is basically what I picked up from my game. And she hears from God, and God is like, okay, take away all of the sinful stuff that Isaac, your son, plays with, and isolate him from the world, and now if you really love me, you'll kill him. And so then Isaac hears that, and fortunately discovers that there's a secret trap door in the room where he's been locked, which seems like a real oversight on his mom's part, but whatever. She's not a trained killer, so I'll cut her some slack. And so he escapes into the poop-filled basement and has to battle monsters to try to survive.
Yeah.
With his tear bullets.
Yes. There's a pretty strong theory for Binding of Isaac that the, like, basement stuff is all sort of made up in Isaac's head, versus, like, there actually being a trapdoor in his room. So, I mean, yeah.
I wasn't sure if the listeners were ready for the he's suffocating in his toy chest part of the story yet. But here we go. Yeah, this becomes much clearer, and so there have been several expansions, because they were able to make expansions because they moved away from Flash, basically. So there have been several expansions that have been released. The last one just came out this past year. And in one of those, and in one of the endings, I guess, there's like lots of endings to these games, it becomes clearer that probably what's happening is that Isaac climbed into his toy chest to hide from his mother. His mother didn't realize he was there when she went in to kill him, so she's out, like, looking for him, and then all of this is a hallucination as he suffocates to death in the toy chest. So that's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Anyway, like many, I think, of roguelikes of this vibe, that story is not especially relevant to what's going on in your moment-to-moment gameplay experience, which is probably for the best, to be honest. But it's I find that it's especially bold in that way. There are not that many, like, not to call this like a Jesus game, because of course it's not, but there are not that many games that try to get biblical with you, really in any way. I feel like I looked into this at some point. I was like, what are the games that are approved by church or deal with Bible stuff? And there's just not that much. Did that Jesus game ever come out? You remember that meme Jesus game?
Oh, I don't know. I know there are games out there that are like explicitly religious games made by religious groups. You know, they do that do that sort of stuff. But I agree that there aren't very many like commercial games that deal with religion in any sort of meaningful way.
Which on one hand I guess is sort of surprising, and on the other hand, what games deal with anything controversial in any meaningful way?
Yeah.
But folks, it's the greatest story ever told. Get on this. Where's my Jesus RPG? RPJesus. I'm giving away ideas here.
Macmillan has talked about that it's somewhat like the idea behind it at least came from he grew up with a lot of Catholic and born-again Christian family, and particularly his mother, and that this is sort of inspired by some of those experiences that he had growing up. Obviously, he did not do zombies. He didn't suffocate to death in a toy toast, but yeah.
So I found the game to be quite fun. I was surprised. I was not expecting this. This always happens to me. I am not very good at roguelikes. I guess because I don't play them very often, but also because, like I said, I don't understand projectile motion.
Uh-huh.
And I was really, it was taking me back to when I played Spelunky 2 for the podcast, which again, I had a lot of moment-to-moment fun with Spelunky 2 I think that was also about a year ago. And my brain just went, wasn't that the same episode as Super Meat Boy? But there's no way that it was. Anyway. But I had a lot of moment-to-moment fun with that game while being very bad at it and not really making any progress. This game I sort of felt like I could be better at than I was at Spelunky, just because, I don't know, it didn't feel quite as random. It is procedurally generated, but sometimes Spelunky, it's just like, oh, okay, like, this just feels like impossibly hard to get through. And this one did at least sort of feel like, okay, I'm learning what the enemies are, I'm learning how to fight them, I am getting mostly better as I go. Now, I stopped after my, like, one good run when I played, where I got all the way to the end of, like, the first... So there are, like, levels, right? There are levels to each one. It's a roguelike. Hopefully you're familiar with this. There are levels to it, and then, like, at the end of every 6 levels or so, and there's a mini-boss at the end of each of those, but at the end of every 6 levels or so, it seems like there's, like, a milestone. And, of course, I got to that boss, and I died. R.I.P. But... I think I made it that far because I got a really dope power-up right at the beginning. So like many roguelikes, right, there are power-ups that you can pick up. And in this one, it's sort of explicitly influenced, like we said, by The Legend of Zelda. So they're not trying to hide the power-ups. Like there are a fair bit of power-ups in the game, and you always get one when you defeat a boss, which is very Zelda-like. But I got it in the beginning like a ghost friend. And the ghost friend, like, or in a different one, I had, like, a robot friend that shot lasers. But that kind of sucked, because I couldn't aim it, and I'm already bad at aiming my own projectiles, so that was just a disaster. The ghost friend just went up and, like, chewed on people. Like, I didn't have to do anything. I could just run around and let the ghost, like, chew on them. So that really helped.
Yeah. Yeah, I think... I don't know if it's in the original release or Rebirth, but I think at least now there's like over 700 different items in the game that you can get and use. To the point where I think I read a quote from Macmillan working on like Repentance that he just has to go to the fan wikis so that he can double check that the item that he's making now is not something that already exists, that he's already made.
So
because he simply cannot remember them anymore.
I mean, I guess that's what happens when you've been making a game for like 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, so overall, I did enjoy my, like, hours. So I thought I would play it and I'd be like, oh, I'll play a couple runs and I'll get bored and it'll be too hard. But, you know, I might play more. I understand the appeal of the Let's Play. Clickbait Boyfriend got very into watching it. Well, it was mostly very tense watching it. It was mostly like, watch out! I am watching out. I'm just bad at this. But Nintendo did not want this game, which is funny because now it's on Switch. But
yeah. They're working on a 3DS port, which is funny to think about. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something about it going to the 3DS is very funny to me for no particular reason. But they then backed out of it because they were uncomfortable with some of the religious themes.
It was also the first game in Germany to be classified as 16 plus due to potentially blasphemous content. Which is sort of crazy. Like, the religious themes in this game are not that strong.
I guess. There's, like, you know, it's like demons and stuff.
I guess.
You're fighting, like, weird monsters.
It's not clear to me that those monsters are connected. I mean, they must be. Like, I guess they must be. But in playing the game, I was not like, I'm killing God's armies or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel like God was sending the flies to shoot me.
Sure.
Maybe I made the connection. There are occasionally mini bosses that are the 7 deadly sins. And so, okay, then I was like, alright, like, maybe this is religious. But when I was fighting the giant poop monster, I did not really feel like that creature was, like, one of God's children, I'll be honest.
That's true. The 7 deadly sins is like, you cannot say that's, like, blasphemous content. Every game uses the 7 deadly sins, you know?
Exactly. That's why I'm so interested in that, because really all that happens, I mean, it's obvious from to call it an opening cinematic, right, by the way, it's not very cinematic, so if you're gonna play this, keep your expectations low.
Yeah,
right?
Most of the story, I believe, is framed by, like, Isaac's drawings, or is at least drawn in that style, so.
But it's just like, I mean, it is pretty literally just a modern day, I mean, you're obviously supposed to think that it's dumb, right? You're obviously supposed to think there's something wrong with his mom, who's, like, watching TV and I don't know, whatever it is, right? Like, you're supposed to feel judgmental of her. You're not really supposed to think she's hearing from God. However, it is pretty literal retelling. So, is Genesis blasphemy?
Maybe.
Like, it's interesting to me to categorize something as potentially blasphemous content when it's just like, it is pretty literally the Bible story plus some poop.
Well, that's it. Maybe it's putting poop in the Bible.
But what about the well-known Bible book, Everyone Poops? According to Everyone Poops 3:17, everyone poops. Now Talk This is going to get dinged for potentially blasphemous content. Great.
Anyway, Macmillan says that he's done with Isaac for now, after Repentance has come out, although he has said this previously. But he said it about Afterbirth Plus, which was not received very well by the community, so he perhaps felt a little bit inclined to return so that it didn't end on a sour note. But he says he wants to go back to making, like, small games faster. Like he used to do, like the beginning of his career. So we'll see.
I mean, he'll do that until he makes one more game and it sells another 1 million copies, and then he has to make 4 expansions for it. That seems to be the pattern.
Well, he did leave Team Meat. He left himself off the Super Meat Boy resurgence, so he's capable.
That's probably for the best.
If
he wants to make games quick, he probably does not want to be on Team Meat.
Yes, yeah.
There is multiplayer in this version, which I didn't realize until I read about it preparing for the show after I had played it. So I might have to have Clickbait Boyfriend be my, like, little ghosty buddy. We'll see. But I don't think that I'm ever going to get to the end of this game, which is a bummer. because I like to finish games, but I probably will play a little more because, yeah, it was at least satisfying enough, had enough of a gameplay hook. And I was like, okay, I'd like to at least get good enough that I can get past the first world type thing. Well, speaking of gameplay hooks, speaking of surprise Steam hits, these games would be hard to mash up, by the way. I hope you're prepared for that.
Yeah.
It's time to talk about Valheim.
Yeah. Valheim is a survival sandbox game from Iron Gate Studio that is released early access last February 2nd, and is still in early access. Developed by a very small team, so I imagine it will be in early access for a while yet.
They originally said that they thought it would be in early access for about a year, but maybe longer if they wanted it to be. It's now been in early access for about a year. They were at the anniversary. And yeah, it does not look... I mean, I don't know. Why ever take it out of early access if you're selling like 5 million copies?
Yeah.
What's the point? Just say, we're done.
I mean, it's interesting because it's like... you know, there are games that don't call themselves early access that still, like, release, like, more content, like, ongoing games. And that's basically what this is. So, I don't know, it's a weird distinction between what is an early access game and what isn't.
I guess so. Because, okay, so listeners, let me introduce you to Valheim first. Because I think what I'm going to talk about deals with, like, okay, here's what the game is about, right? So Valheim... in Valheim, you're a dead Viking. So maybe this is blasphemous content, too. You're a dead Viking, and you're in Valheim, which is a made-up, it's like a 10th made-up Norse mythology world, right? You probably, if you play video games, you're probably more familiar with Norse mythology than you are with the Bible.
Yes.
To be honest. And so basically you're dead there and you're trying to prove that you're worthy of reaching Valhalla by, killing some of Odin's enemies for him here. And so what I was going to say is that I think that the, one argument for this being early access as opposed to just, it's a game with ongoing content is that the game does seem to be presented as, you have to kill the 5 bosses. And it's unclear to me that I don't think the 5 bosses exist yet. Some of them do. But I don't think there's a way to finish the game. So that would be my argument for, why early access makes sense here. But you're right that I did think, no one is calling... Well, they're not, right? Genshin is not in early access, right?
That's what I was thinking of, is, they're working on, they're working on, the Mistlands right now, which is, a piece of land that you can go to, but there's not very much there. So, their next big expansion is adding stuff to the Mistlands, and I was like, that's just, Genshin's just, opens up new areas and updates, right? They're like, here's the next kingdom, or whatever, and it doesn't feel that fundamentally different, but you wouldn't call that early access, I guess.
I guess it depends on what they think the end stage of this game is. Obviously, Genshin thinks of itself as a live service game. That's what it is. I'm less certain of whether Valheim thinks of itself as it's going to be a live service game, or it's just that they are a sub 10-person team, and there's only so much game that they can finish at a time.
Yeah.
Obviously, over this early access period, it's going to feel like a live service game to some extent, but it's not as clear to me that that's sort of what the final product of the game wants to be. It might be. They have a lot of players, so they could certainly print money if they wanted to.
I guess the other distinction is they are still working on, mechanics, I guess.
Yeah, you can't ride horses.
Yeah. I guess Genshin, maybe they could add mechanics, but, the fundamental core of that game is done. Whereas, their most recent update, introduced the ability to destroy items or something, which hadn't been there before, and is sort of fundamental to a resource gathering game, that you not just be carrying around useless crap in your backpack or whatever.
It's true. So in Valheim, right, basically the idea is that you're dropped onto a procedurally generated island. Again, this is why this is going to be impossible. Because these games share so many weird little things that it's going to be like, you're Jesus. And you've been dropped into an island.
Jesus survival game. I'd play that, but we're skipping ahead.
Sorry. So you're dropped in the middle of a procedurally generated island, and eventually you have to kill a bunch of like bosses for your boy Odin. But to do that, you have to survive. And what's really nice and really interesting and makes me really bummed that I cannot play Valheim because it is only out for Windows and Linux, is that it's a survival game without many of the sort of like highly irritating portions of survival game. So, for example, in many survival games, you have to eat or you starve. And in Valheim, that's not the case. Eating is highly essential for strategy because it gives you buffs, it gives you more hit points, that kind of thing. But there's not a punish side of it for not eating. If you never want to eat at all in the game, you can do that. Similarly, if you want to come back and repair your weapons, there's no cost to that. You have to be back home. You can't just repair your weapons at random in the plains. But there's no resource cost to repairing your weapons and armor. If you put your roof in the wrong place because you are... I mean, it's not on Switch, right? But if you put your roof in the wrong place because you don't understand how computer controls work and you press the wrong button, there's no punishment to... If you break it down, you get all the resources back and you can just build it again. So it's interesting. It's a survival game for people who... Well, it's a lot of things for a lot of people, which is what's interesting about it. But one thing it is that it's a survival game for people who are more interested in the, like, fun parts of the strategy of those games and less interested in the punishy parts of the strategy for those games.
It's also a PvE, a player versus enemy game. There is PvP that you can toggle on, but it's de-emphasized, I guess. And I feel like a lot of these survival games have some, like, strong element of PvP where like you can be building something and someone can come like destroy your house or whatever because they feel like it, and that is not really in this. It's mostly about collaborating with your friends instead of fighting them.
Yeah, so in Valheim you can play single player, but you can also play on a server with up to 10 participants. So there were a lot of, like, all of the reviews of this where people were talking about how much they loved it. I could not believe that this game that has not been released was PC Gamer's Game of the Year, by the way. I guess 2021 is a weird year, and obviously people really like Valheim, but that was still, like, shocking to me. That, like, this is a beta test, right? I know that's not what early access is, really, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but you can play with, I guess, up to 9 friends on a server, and yeah, there was just a lot of, like, some of the energy with which you hear people talk about, like, Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm sure some of the energy with which people talked about, you know, other games which shall remain nameless for now, for here, or other times in gaming history. But it just seems like, yeah, it's like people had a lot of fun kind of like getting to plan their excursions with their friends and then going out and the excursion is just an absolute dumpster fire and then figuring out what to do from there and like how do you rescue your dead friend and like that kind of thing. It sounds interesting and delightful to play as a group.
Yeah. You can also, I think one thing that's vaguely at least unique to Valheim is you can, when you play on multiple servers, you can bring like your character and the stuff that your character had from server to server. So you're not necessarily like don't necessarily have to start fresh from one server if like your friend you don't normally play with is like, hey, you want to play some Valheim? And bring your character over, so you don't have to deal with like starting over.
Yeah. I loved that all of the, like, end-of-year reviews of this game were like, I didn't really want to play another survival game, and now I've played 20,000 hours of Valheim.
Yeah.
I got a lot of Civilization vibes from the way people talked about it, which scared me.
I have heard it is somewhat harder to do solo, that it is sort of tailored to a co-op experience, just in terms of like having to grind out stuff on your own, basically. But it is possible to play it solo as well.
That makes sense. I'm hoping, they talk on the website, they're like, a lot of people ask us about Mac, and that would be a lot of work, but maybe in the future. And they also say, we're not planning consoles, but maybe in the future. But also, look, I get it. They're a tiny team, right? This is not me being like, yeah, but it is a little. It's like, this game sold 5 million copies. Surely, and I know they have a publisher, but it's like, surely someone wants to help you bring this to wherever you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it seems like if you release this on any other system, it would continue to print money there, and why wouldn't you find a way to do that?
I guess it just, yeah. And Mac I could see, but I'd be surprised if it ends up on any consoles before it leaves early access.
Fair enough, but surely this game is going to come to Xbox Game Pass at some point, right?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of complications to bringing it to other systems, such as, like, being able to do crossplay, for instance. Right. And then it's still in active development, right? And then suddenly you're adding more systems that it has to be in active development for, and you have to make sure that it works on those systems. And yeah, you could hire another company to, like, do the port work for you, but then what if the port's bad, and then you get all the bad press for having that bad port? So I see why they're hesitant to bring it to any other systems.
Oh, I totally get that for when they're in early access. I just think the moment that this game comes out for real, they're going to be overwhelmed with people being like, it's got to be on PlayStation. It's got to be on Xbox. There's already the guy at Panic Button, which does a lot of Switch ports, is already like, I want to port it to Switch. He's like, I've been playing too much of this. Let's bring it to Switch. It's like, okay, dude. I can't even imagine, like, do you think that they had any idea that this was going to happen to this game?
It doesn't seem like it, no.
I just can't imagine. I can't imagine anything in my life. Like, I can't imagine what it would feel like to be like, I made this thing, like, with my buddy that I convinced to also leave our job to make this game. And now it's sold. There are more people. I really like this quote from an article I read. There are now more, like, active players of Valheim than there were actual Vikings.
Yeah.
And, like, let alone, like, imagine making this game. Man, imagine being a Viking. I can't imagine being a Viking and then being like, by the way, in 800 years, there's going to be a ton of people playing a game where there are dead you. Also, you'll be dead. So to kind of be like, it's you.
I mean, to make a game like a sandbox game, you do have to hope that it's mildly successful, or else it's, like, totally not successful, right? Because it's sort of built on, somewhat at least built on people playing it together. But no, I don't think there's any way they could have anticipated, like, that it's, like, one of the top played games on Steam.
What would you buy if that happened to you?
What would I buy? I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're, like, drowning in money because there's this many people playing it. I think that they're normal well off from this many people playing it. I don't know.
Guess, but I guess what I'm just saying is, like, 5 million people bought this game in a month. 5 million. And I know that, like, that's not, like, all of that money. Like, a lot of that will go to the publisher and it goes to Steam. Like, there's all of those cuts. But still feels like there should have been a sweet little bonus.
Well, I'm sure they got a bonus, yes. There's only 5 of them after all, so.
Another thing that's going to make this mashup challenging is that they've also explicitly talked about how it's not really inspired by other survival games, which makes sense because like a lot of the things that people like about it are that like they take the survival game things and they're like, we don't like these things about these games, so we're not going to do them. But and like that is where it came from. It's like they were developing some kind of other simulation game and then they scrapped it because they were like, what's the point of simulating all this stuff if it actually detracts from the player experience? And it's like, wow, good thing you guys weren't working on Red Dead, huh? But they actually talked more about being inspired by The Legend of Zelda, so and Skyrim. So this mashup is just going to be the same game. It's just going to be...
who's not inspired by The Legend of Zelda, though?
I know, fair enough. I guess. Katamari is probably not inspired by The Legend of Zelda.
Clearly they were not inspired by Breath of the Wild's weapon system, though. So.
Yes, they were anti-inspired.
They're like, we're inspired to do the opposite of that.
I was interested in... Polygon has a lot of coverage of this game from like a very game design standpoint, which was cool to read, but I was like, why is there so much Valheim coverage that's like this thoughtful? It was surprising. Not that Polygon doesn't normally have thoughtful coverage. I was just like, why are there like 5 different articles about the game design of Valheim? This game that's not even out. There was an interesting one that tied into our cozy side quest. About the balance of hygge and danger in this game. I don't know if you read that. Yeah, the idea that... And I sort of liked this because it got at... Okay, here's what I like about cozy games, but it, like, takes it into something that takes away the things I don't like. Like, oftentimes what I don't enjoy about kind of, like, a cozy game is, yeah, they feel a little too easy, or there's nothing that's, like, super... It's, like, not keeping me coming back. And this, you know, to compare it to ultimate cozy game Stardew Valley, right? But you get that balance here of there's coziness, but that coziness is for a point, and your breaks between the cozy and the danger make sense and augment each other. It's not just like we've given you a campfire moment because we hear you like cozy times, gamers. It's like, no, you're building your home because you have to have a roof to craft things, and like you have to have these things so you can go out and like brace yourself for the wild, and that makes the wild feel even more kind of like frightening and out there when you're away from the coziness. It was interesting. It was an interesting perspective on how cozy can be more than just a trend and actually really support what a game is trying to do. Mm-hmm. And obviously there are other games that do that, but after that side quest, I was feeling a little bit like, oh, okay, so it's just everyone has campfires now.
Pretty sure you can make a campfire in Valheim, yes.
Though. I mean, yes, sorry, not to say that campfires are bad. This is not an that would be blasphemous. I mean, to be like, this is an anti-campfire podcast. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's like, oh, okay, like, you can't just call your, like, it's not super great to just be like, okay, we're just gonna have this, like, little cozy moment in the game for no reason. Like, here, the coziness augments the game in a way that's obviously thoughtful.
I like how you called Stardew Valley, like, the pinnacle cozy game when I think Stardew Valley is hard and stressful. So
I know. I know that you feel that way. It's true. It is kind of stressful. There is stressfulness to Stardew Valley. I don't disagree. I just need a little bit of stress in my coziness because if I don't have a baseline level of stress, I die.
I guess that's fair.
What's the movie where they have to be going at like 70 miles per hour?
Drive?
Speed? I think really what I'm thinking of is eustress deficiency from Psychopaths, so there's a reference of the day. I need to have a certain level of stress or I cannot relax.
There you go.
There's my psychoanalysis. But Emma, the low poly.
I read a lot of things calling it very pretty, actually.
I know, I did too, but I liked that everything was like, it's low poly, it's low res. And I was like, good for them for working around that.
Yeah, the way it is like the models themselves are pretty low res, but then they use like textures and lighting and shaders to make them look better. And they also have a pretty dynamic weather system that is impressive to look at. So, on the whole, it makes it look pretty. But if only Pokemon could learn from this.
I mean, you know, Arceus is basically Pokemon Valheim, right?
Sure. You can die. It's true.
Yeah. Pretty much the same. You can dress yourself as a Viking probably too.
Probably.
So are you ready to mash these two up? I'm scared.
I'm ready. Sandbox Doom.
Did you say Sandbox Dune?
Doom.
Oh, Doom. I thought you were proposing a game based on the novel Dune.
No.
That was a sandbox. That'd be pretty funny.
There's already some sort of tactical game coming out based on Dune, so...
Sure, of course there is. So the big important thing that needs to be is that this needs to be a game that the two of us can design in like about 3 hours, and that will go on to sell 20 million copies.
The two of us specifically who don't know how to code?
We can bring on a programmer.
Okay.
CBB will do the soundtrack.
Okay.
Animal sounds by your dog. And me.
Sounds good.
No, but it's like, it's gotta be something that, like, made by a tiny team that is gonna be an absolute runaway smash financial success. So, no pressure. What's your idea?
See, I don't feel like that part has to come into the mashup. It's a design exercise, you know? We don't have to be like, we're mashing up successful game and successful game. Therefore, we must make at least $1 billion.
I think the tiny team element of it, though, is fair.
That's fine. Sure.
As
although ultimately that just
design.
comes down to something like relatively simple and in concept, not like we cannot, this game must be made by 4 people, like we even know what that means.
It means it's a little poly. No, okay, but it's gotta have procedural generation. Both these games procedural generation games. Yeah. Probably has to do with some kind of mythic or religious...
Doom guy.
Doom guy?
He goes into hell and fights like demons and stuff.
I'm sorry, you're right. I'm sorry. I thought you were saying Doom guy was the religious figure.
No. Maybe he is. You could write a paper about that.
The big twist is, has Doom guy ever taken off his helmet?
I don't know.
He takes off his helmet, it's Jesus.
That's what I think. I think so.
Can you imagine?
I think you write a game theory. Doom guy Jesus? Big red arrow.
Okay, so it's procedurally generated. There's some kind of mythic or religious component. It has to be sort of difficult. Both these games are sort of difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to have a gameplay loop that keeps you coming back.
Okay.
Actually, sorry to keep doing this. A Jesus roguelike has some nice ideas behind it.
Does he... What is that? What's the concept there? Like, what is the gameplay of the Jesus roguelike?
I don't know. The only idea is that, like Jesus was resurrected, so you are resurrected.
Okay.
That's all I've got.
Like, you shoot love at like God's love at people.
Yeah, I don't know if we're trying to do Old Testament God or New Testament God here. It's a tricky line.
Well, it is Jesus, so...
I mean, I know.
He does show up only in one of those testaments.
could probably do. You could do it like you can switch off. Like you could switch characters. This does not match up anything from Valheim though. Like a Jesus survival sim doesn't really make any sense.
And considering he can just make, wine and fish anywhere he goes or whatever.
He's got to have, but here's the thing. He has to have access to water to turn it into wine.
It's true. But do you think Jesus can pull, like, moisture from the air?
I think that's in the skill tree. I need to move away from this. I can't make art. It was going to be JRPJesus for a minute, but that was going to be very weird. I can't make
JRPGs are normally the genre that deals with religion the most. I know, although I think they might be anti-Jesus, to be perfectly honest.
Blasphemous content. I know, the JRPJesus would be pretty dark, because at the end he would have to kill God. But does that mean that he's killing himself?
See, that's very JRPG. That is like a very final JRPG moment.
This podcast has been marked
very Sora stabbing himself in the heart with a keyblade moment,
I could just hear your quick boyfriend listening to this episode in a few months and like you explicitly calling Sora Jesus and just like the sound he is going to make when he hears that. Okay, we have to move away from this. It can't be Jesus. If it's gonna be a biblical story, it's gotta be a biblical story that's not like the Jesus story.
Okay. You could do like a Noah's Ark type thing.
Okay, a Noah's Ark survival sim. Sure. I see that. You have to keep the animals alive. And yourself.
Yes. Very Spiritfarer, but biblical.
And like you have to build a new world when the flood is over. Right? So the early access portion is just the flood time. And then when we release the full game, there'll be like a city building sim.
Oh, actually, I think it would be interesting to actually just start the game like the flood's over. You got Noah, his wife, and some animals, and now you have to sort of like take care of everything, and like rebuild the world. Build yourself a little home thing.
How would you play with your friends?
They're the animal.
I guess we can say there were a few Noahs, right?
Sure. God was like, just in case one of their ships breaks. Maybe it doesn't have to directly be Noah, but like inspired, by the Noah's Ark type situation.
Probably better that it's not Noah.
Yes.
I'm intrigued by that. We'd call it After the Flood.
Sure. Yeah, catchy. Dramatic.
Maybe just flood. Maybe just after.
That doesn't have very good SEO, Madelyn.
You're right. Okay, so yeah, so then like a survival, but you've got to like care for a ton of animals.
Yeah.
This is, other than the Noah parallel, it's like, you shoot things too? Like, what does this game look like?
Well, there's sometimes like raids on your base in Valheim, right, by enemies, so maybe like, the demons come sometimes, and you have to be ready to sort of fight them off, and it's like a bullet hell situation.
Okay. I don't know. So like I'm shooting like holy water.
Yeah, and you can find like blessings scattered across the world that like you can pick up.
There we go.
And add to your power base. Nice. I don't think it can be a roguelike though. I don't think roguelike is very there's some survival sims that maybe you could do like a roguelike with, but I don't think Valheim's style of survival is particularly compatible with roguelikes.
I don't think so either. So I think that's fine. I think it's okay. I think
maybe every time you die, you lose, like, your own upgrades, but, like, your base and anything you've done to your animals and your wife. It's fine.
Can we play as the wife? Do I have
Maybe
to play?
you can play locally with just you and Noah's wife. Not Noah's wife.
I like this. I think this is good. What's the art style like?
I don't know. Whatever feels good.
It's like, do you think
there's a lot of animals, so it has to be somewhat simple, or else it will explode. The computer will explode, I assume.
Well, that's why I'm wondering whether it makes more sense for it to be kind of like a top-down pixel thing. But I don't think
it should look like Minecraft.
It should look like Minecraft.
We should just make this a Minecraft mod.
That's the trick with any game you can propose. You could just say, it should just be Minecraft. What are the consequences? I guess if some of the animals die, there have to be like God smites you or something, right? Like, but see, this is where I feel like there have to be other people, because like if you're like sitting around like breeding animals, like what about you? Is the twist at the end that God kept you around to help the animals get started, but he doesn't actually want people to multiply?
Maybe. Or maybe you could make it like a Sims type situation and have some babies that you can like assign to take care of the animals for you.
There we go.
So at the beginning you're taking care of the animals a lot, but then your farm sort of expands with family members that can take care of that sort of situation for you while you go out more and exploring.
Then maybe the twist is that this is not happening in biblical times, but that God sent another flood.
Sure, yeah.
These are modern people.
We already said it's not Noah, so...
You're right, it's Boa.
It's Boa.
Well, do you feel happy with this game? I feel okay about it. It could be worse.
I feel okay.
I'm a little worried there might already be a game called After the... Like, when I said the phrase After the Flood, I was like, I think that might exist.
It sounds like a movie.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Anyway, working title. Working title. After the Flood. And we'll make it all in about 2 days. 13 before. Well, folks, are there other stories from religious traditions that you feel like are ripe for a blasphemous retelling? Do you wish we had gone with JRPJesus as our mashup instead? Have you played The Binding of Isaac or Valheim, and do you have like big strong opinions, or do you want to teach me how to be better at The Binding of Isaac? Do you also have a Mac and wish that people... Why doesn't anyone make games for Macs? I wish I understood why no games play on Macs.
Because Macs aren't very powerful. So if you have like a gaming PC, it's probably a PC.
I don't understand what computers are. Anyway, if you have thoughts on any of this or other things, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat Emma's about to pull from, and read our blog, featuring long-running series, Clickbait Boyfriend, and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, as a Valentine's Day gift to yourself, why don't you subscribe? We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, basically anywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. Next week is Emma's side quest. Any hints? Any spoilers?
I don't know yet, so no.
So it's going to be a great one, as usual. But then, Emma, what will we be talking about for our next main edition in 2 weeks?
For our old game, we'll be talking about King of Fighters.
That's me. Great.
And for our new game, we'll be talking about Forza Horizon 5.
Vroom, vroom.
I'm gonna make you play car game, Madelyn.
Can I even play Forza?
I don't know.
I sort of thought it might have been a New Gen exclusive, but that could be wrong. That was just my impression.
Well, there's other Forzas.
Fair enough. Forza 4. Forza. Did they call it Forza for that one?
I doubt it. They're not cool enough.
Well, they are not the king of rooms then.
So that'll be 2 weeks. Look forward to that. And then 2 weeks after that, more games. 2 weeks after that, even more games. Forever and ever and procedurally generated ever. So folks, thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a sign off?
This week, I hope that you have a... No, I don't have a sign off. I was hoping it would come to me. It did not come.
Okay. This week, I hope that... Wow, this it's just not coming.
I was like, the first thing that popped in my head is like, I hope you don't suffocate in a toy box. And then I was like, maybe that's not the best way to sign off. But I guess we're going with that.
No. This week, I hope that Odin gives you some easy crafting challenges to complete.